Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon is the newest Scrolls-like game that seems to be doing very well for developer Awakened Realms. In case you don't know what this game is, Tainted Grail is an open-world first and third-person action RPG that is done in the style of the Elder Scrolls games, hence the term Scrolls-like. The game feels like a love letter to players who yearn for more experiences similar to older games like Morrowind, Skyrim, and more. And for me personally, one game's vibes that I keep getting from Tainted Grail the more I play it is actually Dragon Age Origins, another older game that I miss dearly. And Tainted Grail has that grassroots RPG feel to it that I've been missing. Like, this wasn't made by the mega corporation teams out here that are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to make their game a reality. What I've been really enjoying about Tainted Grail is how it combines the whole Arthurian legend with that of what I can only describe as H.R. Geiger's art style when it comes to the enigmatic Four-Dweller race. It's really cool. I wasn't really expecting to see someone like King Arthur, but designed as a hulking 7-foot-tall, 400-pound beast of a man who looks like he would fit right in with like the Dark Souls franchise or something, but that's what Tainted Grail is. The side quests offer different outcomes. Many of the quests aren't even highlighted on the map, which is awesome. You just run around and talk to people and suddenly they got something that you need to do. Some quests have had me opening up trapdoors and suddenly I'm falling into otherworldly dimensions facing interdimensional beings. Another quest had me infiltrating a giant cave that was filled with drugs where I fought a giant rat at the end. And another had me meeting an undead chef living in isolation and wanted me to cook him some food, and then he gave me magic which lets me to, and I'm not kidding you, turn my enemies into literal cheese. That's a real thing in this game. Look, Tainted Grail is just full of weird surprises like this and more. I even found a big dead monster that looked really weird and there was like an egg behind it. I picked up the egg, I forgot about it, then randomly one day my guy wakes up and the egg just hatches. And now I got some weird axolotl griffin thing that's following me around everywhere I go. I have no idea what's going on. You can even lose one of your arms permanently by petting a giant sleeping toad if you want to. So if you do see one of those when you're playing this game, definitely save your game before you do that, because I'm not kidding either. There's no way to get your arm back, because once that giant toad bites you, that's it. No more two-hand swords for you. Thank God I had to save before that. But anyways, I'm currently in Act 2 of Tainted Grail, and I can confidently say that it is one of my favorite games of the year so far. Its biggest issue is its stability and performance, which Awakened Realms is fixing every other day. There's patches being released all of the time. But besides that, what's on offer here is great, and the game isn't even full price either. It's $45 American right now to buy, and for what's on offer and how big it is, yet densely packed as well, yeah, it's worth it, I would say. And as I played Tainted Grail the same way I played Clair Obscur earlier this year too, I started to realize that, man, these indie games really are showing up AAA, aren't they? I'm getting games that are now full of content and heart for literally half the price pretty much of, say, Dragon Age Veilguard or Assassin's Creed Shadows. As Pure Xbox puts it as seen here, Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon debuts on Xbox to very positive reviews. Fans are even calling it a love letter to open world RPGs, and again, it's not even nearly a fully priced video game, so what gives? And that's really the point of this video, which is that indie games may just become the future, but one website, in this case GameIndustry.biz, thinks this is not only a problem but a threat to the ecosystem of modern game development. Here's the article, and it's titled, "The Deprofessionalization of Video Games was on full display at PAX East. PAX East felt like a warning. Explosive, successful games by solo devs and small teams are great, but it could lead to a dearth of vital specialists." As Brian Francis, who wrote this article, says here first, the success of Schedule 1, Repo, and Balatro has shown games by smaller solo teams can outperform expensive competitors. Some say this points to games requiring fewer developers to be successful, leading to deprofessionalization. Small teams deserve success, but deprofessionalization risks damaging the industry. This was easy to see at PAX East. So Francis spoke to a marketing partner named Ryan Rigney, who said that this whole deprofessionalization is a phenomenon driven by the overperformance of older titles, which are particularly free-to-play live service games, large studios struggling to drive sales sales and the outsized success of some solo developers and small teams. And yes, this is a problem if you're in the business of developing, banking, and pushing games with insanely overbloated budgets that usually take somewhere between 5 years or more to make. When Ryan speaks on the overperformance of older titles, they mean the more legacy games. We're talking Fortnite, League of Legends, and more. Even older games that aren't necessarily live service that keep players' retention despite having come out long before, like Skyrim, or even Baldur's Gate 3, which still has a high player count on Steam. For an example of a more recent resurgence of players coming back to an older game, actually Star Wars Battlefront 2 has had a big jump in players suddenly. So much so that it's actually beaten its peak player count when it first came out on Steam alone, if you can believe it. As you can see here with Battlefront 2's player base from 2022 when it first came out till right now, the game has skyrocketed back up suddenly almost 3 years later. What gives? Why is it happening? Well, it's simple. People are yearning for certain types of game experiences that the industry refuses to fill with newer games. So people now have to go back and play older games out of necessity, which of course costs less money to buy, and since these older games are usually feature complete and relatively bug-free depending on the game of course, this leads to a positive player experience. But the problem is that all of you going back to play Battlefront 2 right now is a bad thing for these companies, because you're playing a game that doesn't have any new content coming out for it. And by playing Battlefront 2, you're not going to want to go play some newer games instead that cost a lot more money, and that's the point. Because that newer game will be more expensive, probably have bugs at launch, and won't feel feature complete the way that Battlefront 2 has right now. And this is a problem, but it's more than that, because the games people are playing are mostly indie games these days, or what's, called indie anyway. And it's also a big problem, especially if you're in the business of selling these big AAA games to millions of people. Because you want people to want the product that you're selling. You want them to open their wallets. But those players who play Tainted Grail, for example, they're kind of the problem, aren't they? Because they're getting these experiences that mimic what the big AAA guys do, but for half of the cost. And that's a really bad thing in their eyes. And the fact that games like Tainted Grail, or hell, even Hollow Knight even, were made by much smaller teams than what AAA is doing is a big problem for them. Hollow Knight, for example, is estimated to have sold somewhere around 3 million sales in total so far, but the number is nebulous and could easily be even more than that. And in case you didn't know, Hollow Knight was made by like 2 or 3 people at best, and its launch price, get this, was $15 only. As this one user said 7 years ago, as you see this from Reddit, why did Team Cherry make me pay $15 for this game? I would have happily spent $30 or even $40 for this game. It's so full of content, but that's the thing, right? Hollow Knight being $15 at release and giving you easily 30 to even 40 hours of content was what's kind of insane. Even by today, you would never get that, dude. It also reviewed insanely well, and since then has become a cult phenomenon, but Hollow Knight represents that problem. How could Team Cherry sell and justify making a game like that for $15? Hell, a single premium skin in Marvel Rivals or Fortnite even costs more than the entire base game of Hollow Knight at release. And the problem with this is that the industry wants to force behaviors onto you as customers first. Because if they can normalize the concepts of inflated price points, you will buy things they sell for what they demand the price to be. Microtransactions are a really good example of this. 20 years ago, you would laugh at the thought of buying a single skin in a game for one character for like $16 to even $25 a pop even. But these days, that's been so normalized to the point that most younger people who play games these days, it's just how things are for them. And that's a good thing if you're a marketing manager or investor in AAA games, because you've successfully convinced an entire generation of gamers that it's totally normal to open your wallet for the latest Gooner skin and spend like $30. But this now brings us back to that GameIndustry.biz article about the whole de-professional nature of how indie games are taking over the industry and why this is a problem. Like I referenced earlier with Francis speaking to that marketing guy Ryan Rigney, the combination of overperforming older titles and larger studios unable to recoup those costs and the success of solo developed games will, as Ryan says right here, drive career professionals from the traditional professionalized side of the games industry. Oh, so what he means is that the more these cheaper, and let's be real, usually better indie games perform, it will just cause the industry's best people to abandon AAA development entirely to seek making their own smaller and more creative ventures instead. And my question to that is, what's so bad about that? Isn't that what we want these days more than anything else? Don't you want more Clair Obscur or Tainted Grail or Hollow Knight-like experiences? These games that are full of cool content but don't cost you $80 American digitally at release, plus the expansions and whatnot? As Brian Francis continues, he says this, is this trend real? It sure felt so at PAX East 2025. It's no secret that the COVID-19 pandemic led to many game companies decamping camping from expo floors, retreating to either all-online promotion or in-person community meetups structured around intermittent panels. Gone are the days where a chunk of the development team can get one-on-one FaceTime with players. Shifts in supply and demand have simply moved where marketing takes place. Francis then continues by saying this. But something else lurked under the surface. Some notable studios like Behavior Interactive and Funcom had classic booths up on the show floor. Devolver Digital had maybe the tallest booth on display, but it was only using it to showcase 3 games. The bulk of the remaining space was taken up by small publishers and game studios. Francis then says this. Wandering through these booths, I found a mix of truly excellent and inspiring games, but also found myself bubbling with frustration. Few of the developers on display were working on teams larger than 3 people. They talked about publishers wanting ever more expensive offerings as part of their pitch deck. Short-term contractors seem to be the best way to plug gaps. Why did it feel like so few proper businesses were fighting to get their games in front of players at PAX? But again, like I said, what's wrong with that? The industry constantly complains that games are too big, it's not sustainable. They're too expensive to make, and because of these issues, many publishers cannot steer away from the tried and true formula of their games. Look at Ubisoft. They've been churning out the same games with the exact predictable formulas over and over for years. Sure, it worked at first, now it isn't really, and why the hell did a game like Shadows take over 5 years to make and hundreds of developers, when the game felt a lot more like a been there done that feeling than anything else? And when I play something like Tainted Grail, I'm just enjoying myself. I get to explore an open world game and find caves and weird dungeons in unexpected places. At one point, I swam to the bottom of a lake that was filled with blood, and then I found an entrance to a shrine. There I found some weird looking dude whose head was misshapen. I fought him, won, opened the gate behind him, and then I discovered this vast area of like golden flowers and misshapen monsters all over. They were protecting some sort of child, an abomination that was made from the dead bodies that littered this area that I was clearly never meant to find. Again, this was at the bottom of a lake that was filled with literal human blood, but I fought the monster, I ended it, and I freed the souls within it. Nobody told me to do any of this. I had no quest that sent me there. I just saw something, explored, and then things just started happening naturally. And what I love about Tainted Grail is while yes, it is an open world game, its actual world is not insanely large. Don't get me wrong, it's still big, but it's not, say, Skyrim or, Ubisoft level big. It's densely packed. You can run from one side to the other in a few minutes, but the game is also split into multiple big open world zone maps, each with their own discoveries and stories and hub towns. I'm seriously just loving my time with the game, I really am, because I don't feel overwhelmed. Also because Awakened Realms, which made Tainted Grail, decided not to have any DI slop nonsense in their games. Its character creator has male or female options, no stupid body types, there's no gender studies stuff in the game either. It feels like a game that was made 20 years ago, but in the best way possible, and that's probably why I'm enjoying it so much. But you see, what Tainted Grail is, well, it's a problem, because they're an indie studio, and games like it and Clair Obscur, which also sold 2 million plus copies already, were both made by much smaller teams and sold for far less too. And currently, as of this video going live, Tainted Grail has reached a peak player count on Steam alone of 24,000 players, which is amazing for a game that costs what it does and is made by the size of the team that's on display here too. But this is what video games should be these days: sizable experiences that are quality over quantity, not full of busy work or gender ideology. They're not trying to nickel and dime you with a billion cosmetic packs. You just buy the game, it doesn't break your wallet, and you get something fun and full of content, and that's it. But these games are kind of a thread now, as Ryan Rigney, that marketing partner referenced in this article, then states. Games like this and more are the real problem industry types who are used to AAA spending and budgets now face. The winners will be the creative renegades. I'm talking about the people making work that would have never gotten greenlit at one of these bigger publishers in the first place. Some of these creatives will start their own studio or dabble in side projects. This is the only creative industry on the planet where one person can make $100 million making something by themselves, and he's right. Clair Obscur is a clear example of this philosophy. It was made by ex-Ubisoft devs and newer first-time developers, and it was a game that would never get greenlighted by Ubisoft at all had they pitched the game to them. But instead, these developers left. They made the game that they wanted to, and now it's probably going to win Game of the Year, and it was a commercial success. But Clair Obscur performing better and selling better than Assassin's Creed Shadows while costing a mere fraction of its budget is not a good look, especially if you work in marketing. Brian Francis even admits at one point that his favorite game at the show, called We Harvest Shadows, was also an indie game, and then he says this: "The story was the same everywhere I went. Solo devs, two-person teams, and publishers fishing for low-budget indie hits were the talk of the show." Francis continues, "I want to be clear here, no one I spoke with at PAX East should feel obligated obligated to give anyone a job. They're small teams making the most of limited resources, and it's the acceleration in game development technology that's made it possible. What feels wrong is how few people seem to benefit from this status quo. So Brian Francis then asked this question after witnessing the absolute domination of indie games at this event, which says, who gets left behind in a world mainly filled with small teams? The roles that Francis brings up includes game audio or musicians, as well as specifically game writers. Because these roles are usually done by everyone in these much smaller groups making these games instead of a single person who specializes in that one craft. In the case of music, I think it's going to be fine for those types, because if you're insanely talented at music, like say Darren Korb, who did all of the Super Giant game soundtracks, you will probably find your way if you are great at what you do. As for game writers, that's a bit nebulous, since a lot of game writing, especially in AAA for the past few years, has been, let's say it bluntly, it's been pretty bad. Garbage even wouldn't be too stretched to say. Yet much smaller games like Chained Echoes or even Stardew Valley show that if someone is passionate enough, they can and will make their projects without the need of 100 people and then some. Brian Francis thinks that the one group that is getting hit the hardest are game writers, as he says here. The GDC 2025 State of the Industry Survey reported that of the 11% of developers laid off in the last year, 19% of them worked in game narrative, the highest of any responding demographic. Two diverging trends are hurting this field: the growth of successful games that don't feature much narrative, either focusing on deep game mechanics or story-light multiplayer, and the spread of story-driven games authored by the creative director and maybe one or two collaborators create conditions that lower the number of available jobs. I can see where Francis is coming from, that he's worried that people who specialize in narrative won't be seen as essential, but the reality is this: most of the roles where people lost their jobs in writing, there had to be a reason for it. Because games like Dragon Age Veilguard, Suicide Squad, Dustborn, Forspoken, Unknown 9, and so many more were all created and designed and written by people with clear agendas to push, who all benefited off the influx of investment money coming in, and yet despite these big cash infusions, the results were obviously horrible. I don't personally feel bad knowing that the people who wrote Dragon Age Veilguard got fired when BioWare gutted part of their studio following that game's horrific release, because Veilguard was dog water with terribly written propaganda at its core. And the other point that Francis brings up, that games that do well are usually not focusing on narrative but instead using things like environmental storytelling, I think that's great actually, because games that do that sort of style of storytelling, well, that's pretty much like Elden Ring, Dark Souls, that sort of thing. It's actually a great way of telling your story, because you're not slowing the game down and forcing players to walk or watch a cutscene every 5 minutes. Plus, because your community then has to work together to figure out what's going on, which you know drives engagement. You're showing, you're not telling. Hollow Knight, which was inspired by Dark Souls' way of telling its story through its environment, is proof of this as well. Look at that community and how thriving it is even to this day. These games don't need walls of text like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, which in my opinion becomes mind-numbing eventually to deal with. When your game has that much dialogue, it is just genuinely detrimental to the flow and especially the replayability of your game as well. I would never play that game again. But Tainted Grail hits a nice balance. It has dialogue obviously, but it doesn't feel too egregious. Sometimes the characters do speak for a bit longer than I would want to, but I think in general most games would benefit from less telling and more showing if you ask me. Because the moments I remember the most from Tainted Grail so far are when I find things on my own. Not saying that the writing is bad, it's good, but like I said with that Blood Lake dungeon, that finding that instead of the game telling me, hey, there's a dungeon there, is why I play these sorts of games and why I remember them. Even with Clair Obscur, which also has a ton of dialogue sort of, it too uses that Soulsborne way of showing and not telling too. And my biggest criticism of Clair Obscur is how it tells way too much and how it does it after Act 2, because it then robs the world of mystery, but at that point, I can't really say much more due to spoilers, but I digress. Look, the point is that while game narratives obviously matter, there is a point where it becomes detrimental to the overall experience. It's why Soulsborne, Souls-like games are so replayable. Of course, it's because the gameplay is usually fantastic, but also because those sorts of games don't really hold you down with 100 cutscenes or force you to walk all the time. You can run around, do whatever you want, and enjoy yourself. When people do speak, though, it's very important. It reminds me actually of Lords of the Fallen. That game, which kinda sits between AAA and AA, is a good example of this. There's cutscenes in it, sure, but it's not egregious. And when people do talk, like I said, it's important. Actually, one user would ask Marek Tymiński, that's the CEO of CI Games, which made Lords of the Fallen with Hexworks, and here's what the user said: did you get materially encouraged to hire DI people by some ESG money, for example, or was it only incitement by consultants and producers using the fear of backlashes from media? And here's what Marek would say: we never had a DI hiring agenda or took ESG cash, just always went for the best talent. When I spoke out against political and social agendas in games, some inside feared we'd stopped being open and fair. Cleared that up fast. Our diverse team's incredible, skilled, aligned, and no CI game game's path. And this is the future of what I would claim to be healthy for video games. Stuff like Tainted Grail or Lords of the Fallen alongside Clair Obscur and more, they all represent that you can make great games devoid of politics and people will buy them and enjoy them. Pretty much, the less barriers you put up, and that means lower price points or removing stupid agendas entirely, the more your game will flourish and do well, assuming the game is still quality, of course. Marek Tymiński also said this about DEI and how the push for such concepts in games has killed many franchises. He said, "A lot of development studios chase DEI hires during the hiring boom, prioritizing ideology over efficiency. That shifted how studios worked, what games they made, and who they made them for, often alienating core audiences. To justify it, they invented a modern audience that was really just a vocal minority pushed as the majority. Activism over output doesn't scale. The results, layoffs, closure, underwhelming games, and a mega loss of money. Grifters, the real grift was selling this as progress, and that's nasty. Players woke up, they know they can demand what's right, and choose the games that deliver. The industry is course correcting. I spoke out early, glad if it helped even a little, not done yet." And when you combine what Marek's philosophy is with CI Games and Hexworks with Lords of the Fallen, and they're making the sequel right now, by the way, that is what players want. And Tainted Grail also represents the same design philosophy. There is no forced diversity nonsense, at least so far. Tainted Grail also takes place in Avalon with Camelot and the whole Arthurian legend. Everyone that I've met in the game looks like an English person from medieval times so far. That means they're all white, because that's what English people look like in that time period. Even the Del Riata, which are these native tribes, they're depicted as Scottish people with heavy Scottish accents. Of course, Tainted Grail is a dark fantasy world, but even then, Awakened Realms has decided to create a game that feels authentic to what its influences are. And I'm sure some may find that problematic, but if you want your forced diversity medieval games, go play Dragon Age Veilguard, I guess, instead. But I think the market is speaking. They don't want overpriced slop games anymore. They want quality games that feel more replayable. You can go buy Lords of the Fallen for like $25 to $30 usually now on most storefronts. There's no DEI or agenda pushing in that game at all. The same with Tainted Grail. That one's $45 American at release, and it honestly feels like a steal for what's on offer there. Clair Obscur was $50 American at release, yet the next Call of Duty will be $80 or $90. Same goes with Borderlands 4 and more. And I think the biggest issue here from what GameIndustry.biz saw at PAX East and with how things are going is that it's very obvious that the usual types want the industry to steer towards this $80, $90 meta where everything is just even more overpriced. Because then they can change the behaviors and force them like they did with microtransaction slop in the past already. But if what PAX East has shown as any indication is that the players are instead pivoting in another direction. And I think what games like Tainted Grail, Lords of the Fallen, Clair Obscur, Hollow Knight, and more prove is that you don't need to spend $300 million making a successful video game anymore. Imagine how many Tainted Grail size experiences you could make for the price of a single Borderlands 4 or Call of Duty game. And the real reason besides greed for why these games are pushing higher price points is because they're not sustainable to make anymore. Marek Tymiński, again of CI Games, has confirmed that his company's games will not adopt this new price point in the future. Here's what he said: "No plans to raise retail prices, not now, not for future games. We're here to grow the audience, not shut people out." And I think in the push for more expensive AAA experiences, the right answer to all of this is to pivot in the opposite direction. Cheaper games made for lower prices that don't need to be 200 hours long with graphics so high res you can see the pimple on some guy's face as you shoot him in the face. Look at Elden Ring, that sold 25 million plus copies in a single year. Go zoom in on the characters' faces when they speak, and you'll quickly notice that their mouths don't even move. Most of them don't even blink at all. Does that mean Elden Ring is a bad game? Of course not. Dark Souls is the same way. You don't need these things if the game is good to play and people still enjoy it. Finally, Francis reported this with this conversation with Ryan Rigney during this whole PAX East quest. Is there a way deprofessionalization can benefit the developers left behind? Ryan Rigney raised one fair point. Part of the reason some indies are running circles around large companies is that those companies can mismanage creative so badly they go for years without shipping a game. If someone smart can crack the problem, improve management at large organizations, and make sure games make it out the door, that could be a way to balance the trend. Good luck to whoever ends up solving that conundrum, because of right now, when your Assassin's Creed game takes 5 or 6 years and doesn't hit sales targets, it's usually because your writers decided to push something like Yasuke instead of giving players what they wanted, and that will impact your sales. So I don't know, maybe a few less writers who push the propaganda isn't such a bad thing after all in the long run. And until then, these smaller, more affordable games will just skyrocket, and good for them. I want more Tainted Grails and Hollow Knights and Lords of the Fallen and more. I want games that don't break the wallet or try to fill my head with nonsense. And until the AAA industry understands that, they will continue to lose hundreds of millions of dollars year after year as they attempt to keep thousands of devs employed making these games that are just overbloated and overpriced. And they may call it deprofessionalization, but I just call it talented people are getting fed up with the monolith. And they can try to paint indie games as a threat or something, but they'll just keep on winning. But thank you for watching, subscribe, go enjoy some video games today, and I'll see you guys in the next one.